The air in the studio crackled with unease as the stage lights burned hotter than usual. Stephen Colbert leaned back in his chair, his signature smirk cutting through the applause like a blade. Across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowed to slits. The audience, packed into the Ed Sullivan Theater, sensed trouble brewing. They had come for a lively debate, but the tension between the host and his guest promised something far uglier. Leavitt, a sharp-tongued political commentator with a new book climbing the bestseller lists, had walked onto the set expecting a fair fight. Instead, she was ambushed. Colbert wasted no time drawing blood. He held up Leavitt's book, Power Moves, Winning in a Divided Nation, and waved it like a prop in a comedy skit. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he addressed the crowd. "So, Karoline, this masterpiece of yours, it's basically a guide to twisting the truth until it screams, right? I mean, you're teaching people how to lie their way to the top." The audience laughed, but it was a nervous chuckle, the kind that follows a punch thrown too hard. Leavitt's face flushed crimson, her fingers gripping the armrests of her chair. She hadn't expected a roast. She'd come to discuss policy, not to be humiliated. Her voice cut through the room like a whip. "You didn't even read it, Stephen. You skimmed a page and decided to play court jester for your adoring fans." The audience gasped, their murmurs rippling through the seats. Colbert's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Oh, I read enough, Karoline. Enough to know you're selling snake oil to desperate politicians. Ethics? You wouldn't know the word if it bit you." The crowd oohed, feeding off the hostility. Leavitt's jaw tightened, her mind racing. She wasn't here to be his punching bag. Anger surged through her veins, making her hands tremble. She'd spent years building her reputation, clawing her way through a brutal industry, only for this smug host to tear her down in front of millions. "You're a coward, Stephen," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "Hiding behind jokes while you slander people who actually have the guts to stand for something." The studio fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. Even the crew, usually invisible behind their cameras, exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the usual banter. This was war. Colbert didn't back down. He tossed the book onto his desk with a thud, his tone icy. "Stand for something? You stand. For whatever gets you a paycheck. Your book's a playbook for cheats, and you know it." The accusation stung, and Leavitt felt the room spin. Her book wasn't about lying. It was about strategy, about surviving in a cutthroat world. But Colbert had twisted her work into something vile, and the audience was eating it up. Their laughter grated on her nerves, each chuckle a dagger in her pride. She leaned forward, her voice shaking with rage. "You're not a journalist, Stephen. You're a performer, a clown. You wouldn't last a day in the real world where people fight for their beliefs instead of mocking them." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others booing. Colbert's face hardened, his charm giving way to something darker. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, not on his own turf. The show's producer, watching from the wings, signaled for a commercial break, but Colbert ignored it. He wanted blood. The fight was only beginning, and neither was ready to yield. Leavitt's heart pounded as she glared at her host, her mind already plotting her next move. She wouldn't let him destroy her reputation without a fight. Colbert, meanwhile, saw her defiance as a challenge to his authority. The stage was set for a showdown that would leave the audience stunned. The audience held its breath as the silence between Stephen Colbert and Karoline Leavitt stretched, sharp and dangerous. The stage lights seemed to pulse, casting harsh shadows across their faces. Colbert, his jaw tight, broke the standoff first, his voice a low growl. "You think you can waltz onto my show and lecture me about the real world? I've been tearing down hypocrites like you for years, Karoline. You're just another opportunist with a fancy book deal." His words were a slap, and the crowd roared, some clapping, others shouting in protest. Leavitt's eyes blazed, her fury barely contained. She wasn't about to let him paint her as a fraud. Her hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. Hypocrite? Look in the mirror, Stephen. You sit here, night after night, preaching to your choir while you dodge anything that resembles a real fight. Her voice was steady now, cutting through the noise like a blade. My book's about surviving in a world you'd never understand, where every word you say can end your career. You're just mad because I'm better at it than you'll ever be. The audience gasped, their cheers and jeers blending into a chaotic wave. Colbert's face twitched, a flicker of anger betraying his usual cool. He leaned across his desk, closing the distance between them. Better at what? Spinning lies until they sound noble? Your book's a manual for con artists, Karoline, and you're the biggest con of all. The insult landed hard, and Leavitt felt a surge of heat in her chest. She'd poured her life into that book every late night, every brutal rejection, every moment of doubt. To hear it reduced to garbage by this smug host was more than she could bear. The crew, frozen behind their cameras, watched in stunned silence, knowing this was no longer a talk show segment, but a public brawl. You're pathetic, Leavitt shot back, her voice trembling with rage. You attack me because you're scared. Scared that someone like me, someone who actually takes risks, makes your little comedy act look weak. The crowd erupted, some chanting her name, others booing her audacity. Colbert's eyes narrowed, his charm replaced by something colder. He wasn't used to being called out, not like this, and certainly not by a guest who refused to back down. The producer, still in the wings, waved frantically for a break, but the fight was too raw, too real. A memory flashed through Colbert's mind, unbidden. Years ago, he'd been the underdog, fighting for respect in a cutthroat industry. Now, Leavitt's defiance reminded him of his younger self, and it infuriated him. You want to talk risks? He snarled, slamming his hand on the desk. I built this show from nothing while you were still begging for airtime. Don't lecture me about courage, Karoline. You're a parasite, feeding off division to sell your trash. The audience roared, the noise deafening, but Leavitt didn't flinch. She saw the crack in his armor, the way his voice shook just slightly. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. You're not fooling anyone, Stephen. You're not the hero you pretend to be. You're just a bully with a microphone, and I'm not afraid of you. The words hung in the air, a challenge neither could ignore. The crowd was on its feet now, some cheering for her defiance, others loyal to their host. Leavitt's heart raced, but she felt alive, every nerve electrified. She'd come to promote her book, but now it was about pride, about proving she could stand toe-to-toe with a giant. Colbert leaned back, his smirk returning, but it was forced, a mask to hide his growing unease. Keep talking, Karoline, he said, his tone venomous. You're digging your own grave, and I'm happy to hand you the shovel. The threat was clear, and the audience sensed the stakes rising. Leavitt met his gaze, unflinching, her mind already racing toward her next move. This wasn't just about her book anymore. It was about survival, about refusing to be broken. The roar of the crowd filled the theater, a tidal wave of noise that threatened to drown out everything else. Karoline Leavitt stood her ground, her eyes locked on Stephen Colbert, who sat back in his chair, his smirk now a thin, dangerous line. The air between them was thick with contempt, each word they'd hurled sharpening the stakes. Leavitt's pulse thundered in her ears, but she refused to break. She'd faced worse than this, backstabbing colleagues, ruthless critics, but none had humiliated her on live television. Colbert's threat to bury her career only fueled her resolve. You think you can scare me, Stephen? She said, her voice steady but laced with venom. I've fought harder battles than this while you were perfecting your bow tie. The audience gasped, some clapping wildly, others hissing their disapproval. Her words cut deep, and she saw it in the way Colbert's fingers twitched, his composure fraying, He wasn't just a host anymore. He was a man under attack, his kingdom challenged by a woman who refused to bow. The crew, still motionless behind their cameras, held their breath, sensing the show spiraling beyond control. Colbert's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. Battles? You mean scheming your way into the spotlight, Karoline? Your book's proof you'd sell your soul for a headline. He grabbed the book again, flipping it open to a random page, his voice mocking. Chapter 3. How to Stab Your Friends in the Back and Call It Strategy. Real classy. The crowd erupted, some cheering his wit, others shouting for Leavitt to fight back. Her face burned, not with shame, but with a fury that felt like fire in her bones. That book was her life's work, not a cheap trick, and he was twisting it into a caricature. Painful memories clawed at her. Nights spent writing through tears, proving herself in rooms where she was never welcome. "You're a fraud, Stephen," she snapped, leaning forward, her voice ablade. "You mock my work because you've never created anything real. All you do is tear people down to feel big." The audience fell silent, the weight of her accusation sinking in. Even Colbert's loyal fans hesitated, their cheers fading. His eyes darkened, and for a moment he looked like a man who'd been struck. Leavitt had hit a nerve, and she knew it. He rose from his chair, towering over the desk, his voice booming. "Real? You want to talk real? I've spent decades calling out liars like you, people who dress up greed as principle. You're not a hero, Karoline. You're a vulture." The crowd roared back to life, split down the middle, their shouts a chaotic mix of support and outrage. Leavitt stood too, refusing to let him loom over her. She was shorter, but her presence filled the stage, her anger a force that matched his. The producer, now pale in the wings, threw up his hands, helpless. "To stop the chaos! You're obsessed with me!" Leavitt fired back, her words dripping with disdain. "You can't stand that I'm out there succeeding while you're stuck playing the same tired game." Her voice shook, not with fear but with the weight of everything she'd endured to get here. She thought of her parents, who'd doubted, her dreams, of the mentors who'd dismissed her. This fight wasn't just about Colbert. It was about proving them all wrong. The audience sensed her raw emotion, their murmurs softening, some even nodding in respect. Colbert's face twisted, his control slipping further. "Succeeding? You're a flash in the pan, Karoline. In a year no one will remember your name, but I'll still be here." The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable, and it stung, but Leavitt refused to crumble. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Keep telling yourself that, Stephen, but deep down, you know I'm the future and you're just the past." The crowd exploded, the theater shaking with their reaction. The fight had reached its zenith, and neither would back down. The theater vibrated with the crowd's energy, their shouts and cheers a storm that seemed to shake the very walls. Karoline Leavitt stood tall on the stage, her gaze piercing Stephen. Colbert, who gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. Her words, calling him the past while claiming the future, had struck like lightning, and the audience was still reeling. Colbert's eyes flickered with something new. Not just anger, but a grudging respect, though he'd never admit it. Leavitt sensed the shift, and she wasn't about to let this moment slip away. This was her chance to end the fight on her terms. "You're out of moves, Stephen," she said, her voice calm but sharp, slicing through the chaos. "You tried to tear me down, but I'm still standing. And you know why? Because I'm not afraid to fight for what I believe in." The crowd erupted, many leaping to their feet, their applause a wave of support. Even those who'd booed her earlier were swayed, caught up in her defiance. Colbert's smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. He'd underestimated her, and now the whole world could see it. His mind raced, searching for a comeback, but Leavitt's strength unnerved him. He'd faced tough guests before, but none had matched his fire like this. "You're delusional, Karoline," he said, his voice strained, lacking its usual bite. "You think this little tantrum makes you a winner? Your book's still a sham, and no one's buying your act." But the words fell flat, and the audience's murmurs told him so. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, waiting to see who would break first. The crew, still rooted in place, exchanged wide-eyed glances, knowing this moment would be talked about for years. Leavitt stepped closer to the desk, her presence commanding the stage. "You're wrong, Stephen. People are buying it. They're buying my book because it's honest, because it speaks to everyone who's ever been kicked down and got back up." Her voice trembled with conviction, and she thought of her readers, ordinary people who'd written to her, saying her words gave them courage. "You can mock me all you want, but you can't take that away." The audience roared, their cheers, now overwhelmingly for her, a tide turning in her favor. A flicker of doubt crossed Colbert's face, his shoulders slumping just slightly. He'd built his career on sharp wit, but Leavitt's raw honesty was a weapon he couldn't counter. He tried one last jab. "Honest? You're a politician's puppet, Karoline, dressing up their lies as wisdom." But the crowd wasn't with him, their boos drowning out his words. Leavitt smiled, not with malice, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already won. She'd come to defend her book but had defended her very soul. "You know what, Stephen?" she said, her tone almost gentle, but every word carried weight. "I pity you. You're so busy judging others. You've forgotten what it's like to believe in something bigger than yourself." The theater fell silent, her words sinking in like a final verdict. The audience was spellbound, some wiping tears, others nodding in awe. Colbert opened his mouth, then closed it, at a loss for the first time in years. The producer, sensing the end, finally signaled for the band to play, but even they hesitated, caught in the moment. Leavitt turned to the audience, raising her book high. "This is for everyone who's ever been told they're not enough," she said, her voice ringing clear. The crowd exploded, their applause deafening, a celebration of her triumph. Colbert sat back, silent, as the show cut to commercial. Leavitt walked off the stage, head high, knowing she'd not only survived but conquered. The fight was over, and she'd left an indelible mark, proving her strength to the world.